The RX8 had never been a favourite among enthusiasts. Low on torque, unreliable, and expensive to maintain. On paper, there's plenty of reasons to dislike it. But here's the thing, I don't think that's why enthusiasts reject it. As strange as it sounds, I think the RX8's biggest problem was its name, and to understand why, we need to take a look at what came before it. Mazda had made plenty of RX models prior, the 2, the 3, the 4, and the RX5. Early RX models experimented with the rotary engines in sedans, coupes, and even luxury GT cars. But the RX7 was different. It took the rotary and turned it into something enthusiasts could respect, a true lightweight sports car. Each generation refined the formula. The first gen, also known as the FB, was simple and agile. The second gen, the FC, got a turbo and went head-to-head with Porsche. Then came the third generation, the FD.
The Mazda RX7, voted Best New Performance Car of 1992.
The only car you think of when anyone says RX7. Twin turbocharged, brutally fast, tunable, and most importantly, capable of taking down cars far above its price point. The FD RX7 became an icon. By the time Mazda was ready to make another rotary sports car, the RX name no longer meant just a car with a rotary engine. It meant revolutionary performance and slaying supercars, one engine rebuild at a time of course. So when Mazda introduced the RX8, ditching the highly anticipated RX7 FE, it sent mixed messages. Was this supposed to be the next RX7 or something else entirely? And this is where things got complicated. Mazda wasn't trying to make another RX7. In fact, the RX8 broke away from nearly everything the FD had established. It wasn't turbocharged, it wasn't a two-seater, and it wasn't designed to compete with higher-end cars. Instead, Mazda wanted something different. A rotary-powered sports car that was practical, comfortable, and easy to live with. It had rear seats, suicide doors, and a naturally aspirated version of the 13B rotary that made its power high in the rev range. On paper, it was still a promising proposition, but to us enthusiasts, it didn't feel like a step forward, it felt like a step back. The RX7 set high and strict expectations that the RX8 simply didn't meet. This is all fairly obvious to see, and has been spoken about endlessly on the internet, but it does beg the question, what would we all think of the RX8 if Mazda had simply created an entirely new name for it, separate from the RX series? The car would have been free to create its own identity, free from the shackles of performance expectations. No longer would it be the car that you buy and people ask, why didn't you buy an RX7? Of course, after heckling you about how many engine rebuilds you've had. Instead, Mazda could have revealed a brand new model. For the purpose of this video, let's say instead of RX8, they called it the Renesis. Not the best name I know, but that's not the point here. Imagine Mazda unveiling the Renesis, a sports car with a high-revving, race-derived engine, 9,000 RPM redline, incredible exhaust note, unbeatable handling, a well-specced interior, 4 doors, and not to mention 237 horsepower. A fairly respectable number for the time. When separated from the shadow of the RX7, all of this starts to seem like a car that could be easily forgiven for temperamental reliability and high running costs. Plenty of performance cars have been unreliable, expensive to run, and difficult to maintain, yet we still love them. The RX7, a ticking time bomb, but still an icon. The E46 M3, infamous for rod bearing failures. The E60 M5 had the same issue. But all of these cars did one thing in particular that the RX8 failed to do. Exceeded performance expectations set by their predecessors. Car enthusiasts have historically been put off by cars that are slower than their predecessors, while simultaneously arguing that it's not all about speed. This is true. Plenty of cars with unremarkable power figures are still cherished by us enthusiasts. The MX-5, or Miata for the Americans, is a perfect example of this, but the MX-5 has always refined the formula and never regressed in terms of power. There are also other examples similar to the RX-8, cars like the Mark V Supra, which didn't get slower, but certainly didn't get as much faster as fans were expecting, given that the R35 GTR saw more than 100 horsepower increase over the R34. So did the new NSX. A car that I've previously discussed, the third generation of MR2, saw a significant power loss over its turbocharged older brother. These cars were all received with mixed but mainly negative feelings from fans. What would have happened if these cars were given their own names too? Would we have seen them differently? Many of us inherently struggle with comparison. It's what makes the idea of a 4-cylinder EcoBoost Mustang seem so off-putting when the V8 model exists. But when that ground for comparison is taken away, it becomes much easier to appreciate a car for what it really is. If the V8 Mustang didn't exist, the tunable EcoBoost may pose a much more inviting proposition. Maybe not the V6 though, no one likes those. From a dynamic standpoint, the RX8 had a pretty good reception, praised for its exciting high-revving engine and incredible handling. While there was also lots of talk about high running costs and reliability fears, the RX8 definitely had enough ingredients for a well-respected sports car. But that doesn't mean with a simple change of name, it would have been an easy ride for the RX8. While I do believe that with a separate name, the RX8 would have gained a lot more respect from enthusiasts, it doesn't mean that the car would have completely shaken itself free from criticism. Lack of torque aside, rotary engines, while unique and thrilling, are high maintenance, the main issue being the apex seals, the critical components that form a seal between the rotor and the engine housing. These seals are notoriously prone for wearing out, leading to a loss of compression and ultimately engine failure. Anything with a rotary engine required a level of care and attention that most other sports cars didn't demand. When it comes down to it, the RX-8's name and the expectations it carried was perhaps its biggest hurdle. If Mazda had introduced it under a new name, it wouldn't have been judged as just a failed RX-7 successor. Instead of being compared to one of the most beloved performance cars of all time, it may have been appreciated more for its unique driving experience and screamer of an engine. In the end, the RX-8's high-maintenance engine and performance shortcomings were difficult to overlook, but they definitely weren't the sole reason for its underwhelming reception.